The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with tension as Judge Charles Dennison adjusted his glasses and looked over the case file. He had seen it all: petty criminals, complicated civil disputes, and the occasional high-profile case. But nothing could have prepared him for this moment. Before him stood a black woman in her mid-30s, dressed sharply in a professional suit that made her stand out in the sea of more typical court attire. Her name was Lena Mitchell, a successful lawyer in her own right, sharp, articulate, and known for her relentless work ethic. But today she wasn't in court as a lawyer. She was here because she had been fined for something she had done outside of the courtroom, a minor traffic violation that had spiraled out of control. Judge Dennison, a man who had never been afraid to wield his power in his courtroom, was about to deliver the verdict. His lips were pressed into a firm line, his mind made up. After all, the rules were the rules, no matter who was standing before him. Lena Mitchell, he began, his voice low as he looked down at the sheet of paper in front of him. You were caught violating traffic laws, and despite your counsel's appeal, the evidence is clear. You will be fined the maximum amount. This is the final decision. Lena didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady and her composure unwavering, a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the judge. He expected her to react, maybe to argue further, plead for leniency, or show some sign of frustration. But she remained quiet. I see you don't have much to say. Judge Dennison continued, a small, knowing smile curling on his lips. You lawyers always have something to say, don't you? But the law is the law. You can't escape it. What he didn't know, what no one in the room knew, was that Lena Mitchell was much more than just a successful lawyer. In the coming weeks, she was going to be nominated to the highest court in the land. She was on the verge of becoming a Supreme Court justice, a title that many would fight for their entire careers to achieve. As she stood there, listening to the judge speak, Lena wasn't thinking about her future or the courtrooms she'd soon step into. She was focused on the moment, on the absurdity of this fine that had nothing to do with who she truly was. What Judge Dennison didn't understand was that this case was far from over. The fine, that wasn't the issue. The issue was the power dynamics at play, and how Lena Mitchell was about to turn the tables in a way no one could have predicted. Lena cleared her throat and then, as if carefully weighing her words, spoke up. Judge Dennison, I respect your position and your decision, but I feel it's important for you to know one thing. My career is not defined by this moment. What's happening today is bigger than a simple fine. In fact, it's much bigger than you can imagine. The judge paused, clearly taken aback by her calm and calculated response. The room grew quieter as he shifted in his seat, his mind racing to process what she was saying. He had seen lawyers trying to use their influence or connections to get out of situations, but Lena wasn't doing that. She was simply making a statement that left him uneasy. For a brief moment, the air in the courtroom seemed to thicken. It was as if everyone in the room, even the prosecutor, could sense that something far more significant was unfolding right before their eyes. The crowd of onlookers shifted in their seats, curious about what would come next. Judge Dennison's voice was tinged with skepticism. And what exactly do you mean by that, Ms. Mitchell? Lena met his gaze with a look that could freeze anyone in their tracks. I'm not just some lawyer, Judge. I'm about to become a nominee for the United States Supreme Court. And when I'm sitting in that seat, I'll be reviewing cases just like yours. So yes, this is bigger than a fine. It's about the integrity of our judicial system. It's about power and how it's wielded. The silence in the room was deafening. The words hum in the air like a challenge, a threat, and a promise all at once. Judge Dennison's hand froze mid-air as he reached for his gavel, unsure how to respond. The prosecutor exchanged a glance with his assistant, a mix of confusion and concern in his eyes. The bailiff looked around the room nervously, unsure whether to take any further action. No one had expected this. For a brief moment, Judge Dennison's face was flushed with disbelief. He had been ready to dismiss the case with a harsh penalty, confident in his authority. But now he was being forced to reassess everything. Lena Mitchell, a woman who had come before him as a defendant for a simple traffic violation, had just dropped a bombshell that no one had seen coming. He could feel the weight of her words pressed down on him, and with it, the uncomfortable realization that he had just been made a pawn in a much larger game. He had no idea what kind of storm was about to hit. Well, Judge Dennison said, his voice faltering, I suppose I was not fully aware of your circumstances, Ms. Mitchell, but the fine still stands. Lena smiled, but it wasn't a smile of defeat. It was a smile of understanding, one that carried a quiet confidence. Of course, Judge, but you'll soon learn that even the law can be bent when you know how to navigate the system. I'm very good at navigating systems. As she turned to leave the courtroom, a new tension filled the room. What did she mean by those words? Was this really just about a traffic violation, or was it the beginning of something far more profound? Judge Dennison, for the first time in his career, was unsure. He watched as Lena Mitchell walked out of the courtroom with a poise and purpose that seemed beyond the typical lawyer's bravado. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something that would shake the very foundation of the legal system itself. As the door to the courtroom swung shut behind her, the judge finally picked up his gavel, his mind still spinning. What had he just witnessed? What had Lena Mitchell just revealed? And what would her nomination to the Supreme Court mean for the future of the country? The answers to these questions would not come easily, and in the back of his mind, Judge Dennison couldn't shake the feeling that Lena Mitchell's true power had only just begun to unfold. As Lena left the courthouse, the heavy doors swinging behind her with a dull thud, she couldn't help but feel a small, but meaningful sense of relief. The ordeal, though frustrating, was over, for now. The fine would still stand, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the look on Judge Dennison's face as he processed her words, the discomfort in his eyes. The moment when he realized just how little he knew about her, and just how much power she was quietly wielding. Lena had always known the path to the Supreme Court wasn't going to be easy. It would take more than just legal expertise. It would require the courage to stand firm in the face of challenges, to push back against the entrenched systems that had been in place for generations. The road ahead would be filled with political maneuvering, media scrutiny, and perhaps most daunting of all, the constant battle against the systemic biases that still lingered in many corners of society. But Lena was prepared. She had spent years working her way through the legal world, proving herself over and over again. She had clawed her way from a small-town law office to one of the most prestigious legal firms in the country. She had fought for the underserved, represented the powerless, and challenged the powerful in ways that many others were too afraid to. She had earned every inch of her success, but becoming a Supreme Court nominee, that would be the ultimate test. Still, the situation with Judge Dennison stuck with her. She had hoped that he would be just another figurehead, an impersonal player in a case that was nothing more than a bump in her journey. But his reaction, his discomfort when faced with her truth, made her wonder, could he be a part of something bigger? Was this case simply a chance encounter, or was it a glimpse into the kind of systemic opposition she would face in the coming months? Lena's mind raced as she walked to her car, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She had been keeping a low profile, focusing solely on her work, but this incident with the judge had sparked something in her. A curiosity, a need to understand the deeper currents at play. Who was Judge Dennison really? Was he just a by-the-book judge, or was there more to him? Lena knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't forget her, and she wouldn't forget him either. The drive back to her apartment was uneventful, the city's busy streets passing by in a blur. But Lena's thoughts remained with the courtroom. The exchange between her and Judge Dennison had been more than just a moment of tension. It had been a test, and she knew she had passed it. The way she had handled herself, the way she had let him see just a sliver of what she was capable of, it had all been calculated. She wasn't just a lawyer or a Supreme Court nominee anymore. She was playing a game much bigger than that, and she was only just beginning to understand the stakes. When she arrived home, Lena immediately went to her study. It was a small room, tucked away at the back of her apartment, but it was her sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, cases, legal journals, biographies of historical figures who had shaped the law. A small desk sat in the corner, cluttered with papers, but everything was meticulously organized. This was where she did her best thinking. She sat down at the desk and opened her laptop, the screen lighting up in front of her. The news cycle had already picked up on her appearance in court earlier that day, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the story spread. A black woman in the legal world was always going to attract attention, especially when she was on the brink of something as monumental as a Supreme Court nomination. But it wasn't the media she was concerned about. It was the undercurrents she felt shifting beneath the surface. There were players in the legal world, powerful figures, who would try to undermine her at every turn. As she scanned through the online articles, one headline caught her eye. Supreme Court nominee faces controversy after traffic fine. The article barely scratched the surface, focusing on the fact that she had been fined for a minor infraction rather than on the bigger issue, the way the legal system would react to her nomination. The story would be twisted, spun into a narrative that would paint her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. That was the way the media worked. But Lena wasn't worried about that. She knew how to control the narrative when it mattered. What bothered her more was the realization that there were others watching, others who would take her every move and turn it against her. There were the old guard figures in the legal establishment who didn't believe a woman like her had a place in the highest court of the land. Some might call it prejudice, others might call it tradition, but Lena knew better. It was power, and power would stop at nothing to protect itself. She closed her laptop with a sigh, her mind swirling. She wasn't going to let them win. She couldn't. Not after everything she had fought for. Lena stood up, stretching her legs before grabbing her coat. The night was still young, and she had a meeting to attend. It was time to put aside her doubts and focus on what came next. The confirmation process was looming, and she needed to prepare. There would be a dozen hearings, countless questions, and all sorts of attempts to paint her as unfit for the role. But Lena Mitchell was no stranger to adversity. She had learned long ago that when climbing the ladder, you can either be crushed by the weight of it, or you can use every step to push yourself higher. As she stepped out of her apartment and into the cool evening air, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the events of the day were just the beginning. There were more challenges ahead, and she knew that the path to her nomination would be filled with obstacles. But as long as she kept her head high and her focus sharp, nothing would stand in her way. The car ride to her meeting was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound in the otherwise empty street. She pulled up to the building, a nondescript office complex on the edge of the city. Inside, a group of colleagues and advisors awaited her. They had been with her every step of the way, and now, more than ever, she needed their support. As Lena entered the room, she could sense the tension in the air. The conversation shifted immediately to her appearance in court. They were all aware of the fine, and they knew the potential fallout from the media. But Lena wasn't concerned with the fine anymore. She was concerned with the bigger picture, the people who would challenge her at every turn. Lena, one of her advisors, Michael, began cautiously. "We need to talk about the judge, the one who fined you today, Judge Dennison." Lena's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected this conversation so soon. "What about him?" "We've looked into his record," Michael continued, "and it's clear he's no stranger to controversy. He's had ties to some unsavory figures, people who've been known to push back against candidates like you." Lena didn't flinch. She had expected this. "So he's another player in the game. But I'm not backing down." Michael met her gaze, concern etched on his face. "Just be careful. He's not the only one who'll be trying to make your life difficult." The room fell silent. Lena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She had known this fight wouldn't be easy. But now it was clear. There were forces at work, forces that would stop at nothing to keep her from taking the seat she had worked so hard for. And she was ready. Lena sat in the dimly lit conference room, her hands folded in front of her, the weight of her next steps pressing down on her chest. She could feel the air thick with uncertainty, but she refused to show it. She had spent too long fighting for this opportunity to let a few rumors and whispers stop her now. Still, the warning about Judge Dennison echoed in her mind, gnawing at her thoughts like an itch she couldn't reach. He was just one piece of the puzzle, but what if his involvement went deeper than they realized? Her team continued to talk, strategizing their next move. They discussed media responses, public relations efforts, and the best way to frame her nomination in the coming weeks. But underneath all the planning, Lena could feel an undercurrent of unease, a sense that there were forces at play far beyond what they could control. She had always been prepared for a battle, but the scale of this one was beginning to feel different. This wasn't just about securing a place on the Supreme Court. It was about a fight for justice, for what was right, for everything she had worked for. As the meeting stretched on, Lena excused herself and stepped out into the quiet hallway. The hum of activity in the office complex faded as she made her way to a small alcove by the window. She needed a moment to think, to gather herself. The city outside seemed so far away, the lights flickering like distant stars. But even here, with her back to the world, the weight of her decision loomed large. She could feel the tug of the life she had left behind, the long hours in court, the early mornings at the office. It was all a distant memory now. This new fight was bigger, more personal, and it was unfolding in ways she hadn't expected. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text from her old friend and mentor, Judge Elijah Monroe. He had been one of the few who had believed in her potential from the start, who had pushed her to keep going when everything seemed stacked against her. "Lena, we need to talk. Something's not right. I've been hearing things about Dennison. Be careful." Her pulse quickened. She had known Judge Monroe was connected, well-versed in the ways of the judicial system, but hearing those words from him made her stomach drop. If someone like him was warning her, then she knew she couldn't afford to ignore it. She texted back quickly, "What do you know about Dennison?" The response came almost immediately. "Not much, but trust me, he's tangled in some dark corners of the legal world. And it's not just about the fine. I have a bad feeling. Don't underestimate him." Lena stared at the screen, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to back down now, but she also couldn't ignore the growing sense of danger that seemed to pulse in the air. Dennison wasn't just a judge. He was part of something much bigger. She could feel it. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her to be cautious. The next few days were a blur of meetings, media inquiries, and tense strategy sessions. The press had picked up the story of her fine and was spinning it into a narrative of her being an outsider, someone unfit for the position she was vying for. They latched onto every small detail, dissecting her every move, questioning her credibility. It was nothing she hadn't prepared for, but the constant onslaught was wearing her down. It was a delicate balance. She had to remain calm, poised, always ready with a response, while beneath it all, the pressure was mounting. But the media wasn't the only battlefield. Behind closed doors, whispers were beginning to swirl. People Lena had worked with for years were starting to distance themselves, giving her polite smiles but avoiding eye contact. She knew what that meant. They were already deciding where they stood. Some were loyal, but others were hedging their bets, unsure of how to align themselves with a nominee who might ruffle too many feathers. In her world, loyalty was often a currency, and she knew she had to find a way to ensure her supporters stayed close, that they didn't jump ship the moment the waters got rough. Lena's next encounter with Judge Dennison came sooner than she had expected. It was a few days after her meeting with her team, and she had been asked to speak at a legal conference downtown. It was a prestigious event filled with some of the most influential figures in the legal world, and Lena had agreed to attend in the hopes of steering the narrative in her favor. The moment she arrived, she was greeted with the usual pleasantries, handshakes, smiles, and small talk. But there was a noticeable shift in the air. People were watching her more closely than usual, their conversations quieting when she entered the room. And then, as she was making her way to the stage, she saw him, Judge Dennison. He was standing near the back of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at her, but Lena felt the weight of his gaze all the same. It was as though he were waiting for something, watching her every move. She forced herself to keep walking, but her mind was racing. What was he doing here? Was it just coincidence, or had he been invited specifically to keep an eye on her? Lena couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected, that the pieces of this puzzle were beginning to fall into place. She had known her nomination wouldn't be easy, but this felt like something more insidious, something personal. As the conference progressed, Lena spoke on a panel about the need for more diverse voices in the legal system, a subject close to her heart. She kept her focus, answering questions with the confidence that had become her trademark. But even as she spoke, she could feel Dennison's presence in the room, lurking just out of sight. She couldn't let him distract her. Not now, but she knew that when the panel ended, she would have to confront him. The moment came during the networking session after the conference. Lena was surrounded by a small group of colleagues when she felt someone tap her on the shoulder. She turned to find Judge Dennison standing there, his face as impassive as ever. "Lena," he said smoothly, his voice betraying no emotion. "I didn't expect to see you here." She met his gaze, her spine straightening. "I didn't expect to see you. You must be enjoying your newfound power." Dennison chuckled softly, a low sound that seemed to echo in the quiet room. "You think too highly of me. I'm just here to listen, to see how the next generation of lawyers is shaping up." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you're doing?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes flicked over her shoulder, surveying the room before returning to her. "I'd be careful if I were you," he said softly, his words carrying an unspoken threat. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Lena felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't flinch. "I think I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Judge, and I'm not afraid of you." Dennison's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We'll see about that, won't we?" With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing in the center of the room, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She knew this was just the beginning. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. But she was certain of one thing: she wasn't going to back down. Not for him, not for anyone. The days that followed were a whirlwind, each one heavier than the last. Lena knew the walls were closing in, but she refused to back down. The whispers, the rumors, the pressure, it was all mounting. And no matter how hard she tried to focus on her goal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker was at play. Her every move felt scrutinized, not just by the media but by those around her. She had always believed in the law, in the pursuit of justice, but now it felt like the very system she fought so hard to be a part of was starting to turn against her. Judge Dennison's words haunted her. "You don't know who you're dealing with." What did he mean by that? She had tried to push it out of her mind, focusing on the public appearances and speeches, trying to convince everyone that she was more than capable of handling the responsibility that came with the nomination. But the tension in the air was palpable. Late one night, as Lena was reviewing documents for her upcoming hearings, her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but she answered without hesitation, her heart already racing in anticipation. "Lena," a voice crackled through the line. It was Judge Monroe. "I have something. It's big." Her breath caught. "What is it? What's going on?" "It's Dennison," he said, his voice low, urgent. "I've been digging around. There's more to him than you know. He's been involved in a number of shady deals, connections to figures who—" He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say they have a lot of influence. They don't want you in that seat, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure you don't get it." Lena's pulse quickened. "What kind of influence?" "I can't go into the details over the phone, but trust me, you're not just up against Dennison. You're up against a system that's been in place for years, protecting people like him. And if you're not careful, it could destroy everything you've worked for." Lena stared out the window, the city lights below twinkling like distant stars, yet she felt far from safe. She had fought her way to this moment, overcoming obstacles and biases, and now the very system she had trusted was crumbling beneath her feet. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice shaking but determined. "Stay vigilant," Judge Monroe warned. "Keep your circle close, and don't trust anyone who might be tied to Dennison. They're everywhere, and they'll be watching you closely from now on. Keep your cards close to your chest, Lena, and don't let anyone see you sweat." The call ended abruptly, leaving Lena in the quiet solitude of her office, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but feel that the world around her was starting to shift. People she had once trusted were beginning to look at her with suspicion, as if she was now a threat instead of the solution. And Dennison, he was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. The unease was settling in her bones, a gnawing feeling she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about her nomination anymore. It was about something much bigger, something that stretched into the very heart of the legal system. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena's every move was being monitored, every word scrutinized. She could feel the tension building with every passing hour. Her team tried to keep things moving forward, but it was clear that there were fractures starting to form within the ranks. Some were starting to lose faith. Others were already shifting their loyalty. She had expected this kind of pushback, but the suddenness of it was jarring. And the more she dug, the more she realized how deep the rot went. Lena's suspicions grew when a well-placed informant, someone she had worked with in the past, reached out with an anonymous tip. The message was short, but chilling. "He's already made his move. Don't let him win." She didn't need to be told who he referred to. Dennison had allies, powerful allies, and it seemed they were making their move now. But how? What was their plan? Lena didn't have much time to figure it out. The media was already running with the story of her fine, making her look weak, inexperienced. Every report painted her as an outsider who didn't belong in the highest court of the land. The whispers in the hallways of the Capitol building were growing louder. Some senators were already beginning to express doubts about her nomination. She could feel the cold weight of judgment in every room she entered. The pressure was suffocating, but she refused to buckle. Then, one fateful afternoon, Lena received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but unmistakably urgent. "Lena, this is Senator Reed. I need you to meet me. It's about your nomination. I have something you need to see." The senator had always been a moderate ally of hers, though she hadn't spoken to him in weeks. This meeting, she knew, would be crucial. She agreed to meet him that evening, at a discreet location, away from prying eyes. The moment Lena stepped into the small, dimly lit restaurant where the senator had arranged to meet, she immediately felt the weight of the situation. There was a tension in the air, as though they were both aware that anything could happen at any moment. The senator was already seated at a corner booth, his face grim, his eyes scanning the room. "Lena," he greeted her in a low voice, his handshake firm but brief. "You need to know what's really going on. It's bigger than you think." He slid a folder across the table, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. Inside were documents, official-looking papers marked with confidential stamps. Her eyes scanned the pages quickly, her mind racing to piece the puzzle together. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "These are records of Denison's connections," Senator Reed explained. "People who have been pulling strings in the background. They've been undermining your candidacy from the start. And now they've set their sights on something much more dangerous. They're not just trying to stop your nomination. They want to destroy you." Lena's breath caught in her throat as the weight of his words sunk in. Destroy her? What could they possibly be planning? Before she could process it fully, the senator leaned in, his voice urgent. "They're making their move tonight, Lena. You need to act fast. You can't let them get away with this." Her mind was racing, her thoughts scattered. She had always known the stakes were high, but this was something else entirely. She was up against a system that wasn't just trying to block her nomination. They were willing to do whatever it took to bring her down. And at this moment, Lena realized she had to make a choice. Fight back with everything she had or risk losing everything. The tension between them hung heavy in the air, and Lena knew time was running out. Lena's mind was a whirlwind, her heart pounding in her chest. Senator Reed's words had just settled in when a sudden realization hit her like a tidal wave. There was something about his urgency, something off about the way he'd handed her the folder, as though he was trying to push her into action without letting her fully grasp what she was walking into. For a moment, her eyes scanned the dim restaurant, looking for any signs of danger, but there was nothing. No one suspicious, no hidden cameras, just the quiet clatter of plates and glasses in the background. She turned back to Reed, her voice low and steady. "How do you know all of this?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. The senator shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly appearing older, more tired. He hesitated for a moment before leaning forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working with the wrong people, Lena. I didn't mean to get pulled into this, but I'm in too deep now." His eyes flickered nervously. I wasn't sure who to trust anymore. And now it's too late to turn back." A chill ran down her spine as she processed his words. Working with the wrong people. What was he talking about? Lena had always known the political world could be messy, but this felt different. She wanted to demand more answers, but before she could speak, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from her chief of staff, Mark. A simple text. "Lena, you need to leave now. There's a breach. We need to talk." Panic surged through her. She couldn't ignore the warning in his words, but what had just happened? Was the senator part of this elaborate setup? Was he eating her into a trap? "Excuse me, I need to take this," she said, standing abruptly. Her legs felt weak as she stepped out of the booth and walked to a quieter part of the restaurant, her heart racing with every step. She swiped at the screen, her eyes scanning the message again. She couldn't shake the growing suspicion that something wasn't right. Had the senator been a pawn in this game all along, or had he been complicit from the start? As she dialed Mark's number, her mind raced with possibilities. She had to know if she was being played, if there was a deeper conspiracy at work. But just as the phone rang, a voice cut through the silence, one that made her freeze in place. "Leaving so soon?" The voice was smooth, almost too calm, and when she turned, her breath caught in her throat. Standing at the entrance of the restaurant, his eyes fixed on her, was none other than Judge Denison. Her heart dropped. How long had he been watching? How much did he know? Lena took a cautious step back, her instincts on high alert. "What are you doing here, Judge?" she demanded, her voice as steady as she could manage, though the fear in her chest was palpable. Denison smiled, his expression cold, calculating. "I could ask you the same question. But then, I suppose you figured out by now that things aren't exactly what they seem, haven't you?" She clenched her fists, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to shift in her mind. The senator's cryptic warning, the urgency, the strange circumstances. Now it was all clicking into place. The senator had tried to warn her, but what if his warning was too late? What if Denison had orchestrated everything from the beginning? "You've been playing me this whole time," Lena said, her voice quiet but filled with a quiet rage. "Haven't you?" Denison's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "I wouldn't say playing, Lena. I'm just making sure that justice gets done, and you're not the one who's going to be in that seat. Not unless you learn how to play the game." The words hit her like a punch. The reality of it all sank in. Judge Denison wasn't just some obstructionist. He was a mastermind, and Lena was nothing more than a pawn in his larger game. Her entire career, everything she had worked for, had been carefully calculated to serve his own agenda. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're wrong," she snapped. I won't be intimidated by you." Dennison chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. "You're right about one thing, Lena. You won't be intimidated, but you'll be broken. And when that happens, you'll see exactly who controls this system." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But I'm not here to destroy you. Not yet. I just wanted to give you a little taste of what's to come." A sense of dread washed over her. He was toying with her, pulling her into this web of lies, manipulation, and power struggles. And she wasn't the only one caught in it. She thought about Mark, the team working behind the scenes, the people who trusted her. What was Dennison going to do to them? How far would he go to ensure she didn't take that seat? Her phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't a message from Mark. It was an alert, one that made her blood run cold. The headline read, "Breaking. Supreme Court nominee under investigation for alleged financial mismanagement." Her stomach turned. She was being framed, dragged through the mud by the very people who had been pulling the strings all along. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a personal war, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. Dennison's voice cut through her thoughts. "You've already lost, Lena. This is just the beginning. By the time you realize who you're really up against, it'll be too late." Lena's mind raced, but her heart remained steady. She wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. She turned on her heel, determined to get to the truth, to expose Dennison for who he truly was, no matter the cost. But as she stepped out of the restaurant and into the cold night air, the question lingered in her mind. Who else was involved? Who could she trust? And how much more was she willing to sacrifice to expose the truth? Dennison had set his traps, but Lena knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Lena's heart pounded as she hurried through the streets, the night air sharp against her skin. Her mind raced with a million thoughts, each one more tangled than the last. She couldn't stop thinking about the message, the breaking news alert that had just flashed on her phone. It wasn't just a personal attack. It was the beginning of a full-scale effort to destroy her. The accusations of financial mismanagement weren't random. They were part of a calculated plan to ruin her reputation and prevent her from reaching the Supreme Court. But Lena refused to let that happen. She'd already called Mark, urging him to bring everything they had to light. Any shred of evidence, every conversation that could prove the manipulation behind these false allegations. But the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The system was rigged, and it wasn't just Dennison pulling the strings. There were others, powerful, untouchable people whose names Lena couldn't even begin to guess. When Lena reached her office building, the lights were still on, and Mark was waiting for her in the lobby. His face was grim, his eyes dark with concern. "It's worse than we thought, Lena," he said, his voice heavy. "The leak came from someone inside your campaign. They've been feeding Dennison information for months. We got someone on the inside, and I don't know who it is." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Someone she trusted was betraying her. She had always known the political world was full of backstabbing, but this was beyond what she had ever imagined. "We need to get ahead of this," Lena said, her voice sharp. "Find out who it is and then expose them. They won't get away with this." But Mark hesitated. "Lena, I don't think it's that simple. Dennison, he's got something bigger planned. You're not just his target anymore. He's targeting the entire Senate, the judiciary. This goes deeper than just us." Lena's stomach churned with dread. She thought about everything that had led up to this moment. The senator's warning, the strange behavior of Dennison, the conspiracy that seemed to stretch out in every direction. There was one thing she knew for sure: she was the key. If she fell, everything would crumble. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message from an anonymous number. She clicked play, her breath catching in her throat as the screen revealed a grainy image of someone sitting in a dark room, face obscured in shadow. "You think you're in control, Lena," the voice said, distorted, cold. "But you're not. This is bigger than you could ever imagine. What you've uncovered, it's only the beginning, and you'll never see the rest of it coming." Lena's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The figure on the screen didn't answer. Instead, the video cut to a new clip, a brief shot of a conference room, with the names of several prominent senators and judges flashing on the screen. Her heart sank. They were all involved. The corruption ran through the heart of the Senate, through the judicial system. Everyone she had thought she could trust was part of the scheme. Just as she was about to react, Mark's voice broke through the silence. "Lena, you need to see this." She turned to him, her breath catching in her throat as he handed her a file. Inside was a list of names. At the top was Judge Dennison's name. Beneath it, a series of other judges and key political figures, all linked to the conspiracy. But there was one name Lena hadn't expected to see, her own. "Why is my name here?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she scanned the page. Mark met her gaze. "I don't know yet, but I think they've been framing you this whole time. You were never meant to be their nominee, Lena. You were just a pawn in their game." The weight of the revelation hit her like a freight train. She wasn't just fighting for her career, she was fighting for her freedom. And the worst part, she couldn't even be sure who her real enemies were anymore. Dennison had been playing her all along, manipulating every move to lead her to this point. But the true mastermind behind everything was still a mystery. Lena clenched her fists, determination rising in her chest. "I'm not going to let them win," she said, her voice steady but filled with fury. "I will expose them all, every last one of them." Just as she finished speaking, the door to her office slammed open, and the last person Lena ever expected to see stepped into the room. It was Senator Reed. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "You need to listen to me, Lena," he said, his voice urgent. "You're not the only one in danger. I'm involved too. They've been using me as a pawn in their game." Lena's jaw dropped. You knew about this and didn't warn me." Reed's face fell. "I didn't know how deep it went. I thought I could control the situation. But now, it's too late. They're coming for us both. And it's not just Dennison. There's a whole network working against us." Before Lena could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. She hesitated for only a second before answering. "Lena," the voice on the other end said, "you don't know who you're up against." It was a voice she recognized immediately, Judge Dennison. "I told you it wasn't over," he said, his tone low and chilling. "You can fight all you want, Lena, but you'll never win. The system is already in motion, and I had friends everywhere. You'll never be able to stop what's coming." Lena felt the walls closing in, but this time she wasn't going to back down. "You're wrong, Dennison. This ends now." With that, the call abruptly ended, and Lena knew the time had come. The conspiracy that had ensnared her, that had threatened to take everything from her, was about to explode. The stakes had never been higher, and the battle was far from over. But in that moment, Lena understood something fundamental. The only way to win was to play the game better than they ever could.